All right, we are live. Thank you both for joining us. Hello, everyone in the Austen community. I'm super excited. We already have some people here joining us, so I think we're going to have some fun conversation today. My name is Melissa. Some of you might see me here in the community. I am the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation Community Manager. I'm having a lot of fun making new YouTube videos for our community space, and I'm really excited today to be joined with two of the three creators of Jane Austen July. We have Katie and Claudia with us, and we're just going to have some fun, talk some Austen. Feel free to be joining us in the comment section. And I can't think of a better way to spend my afternoon, evening for both of you rather than talking about Jane Austen. So, Katie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your channel, and we'll just go ahead and get right into things.
Yeah, of course. Hi, nice to be here. So my name's Katie, and on YouTube I run the channel Books and Things, where I talk about books a lot, and I talk about classics a lot and historical fiction, and lots of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens chat going on my channel. And as well as being a booktuber, I'm also an author. So I've had two novels. Well, I have one novel that came out last year, The Secrets of Hartwood Hall, and then my second novel, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst, is coming out next week in the UK. So that's very exciting. And yeah, that's me, I think.
And you also have a new Patreon community that's just launched fairly frequently as well. So you can also check her out over there. Claudia, tell us a little bit about you and your channel.
Hello, I'm Claudia. I run the channel Spinster's Library on YouTube. And like Katie, I read a lot of classics. There are probably not as many as she reads. And I make videos about predominantly classics of the 19th and 20th centuries, some video essays, reviews, just, all the booktube fun.
Your videos are amazing. You make me feel like I need to do so much more learning when it comes to the classics. And I was telling Katie, we were chatting a little bit earlier, and I said her videos entertain me so much and make me feel like I'm sitting in the room really enjoying somebody that is reading these books. And you can, both of you can tell the joy that you have in the reading that you're doing and sharing it with the online community. So obviously something sparked the creation of Jane Austen July. It's been going on for how many years now? I've seen different numbers. Do we know exactly how many years?
I don't remember now. I think it's 6 or 7. I get confused as well because whenever you say how many years something's been going, because obviously there was the first Jane Austen July and then we're in a current Jane Austen July. So right. I think maybe this is the 7th Jane Austen July and it's been going for 6 years.
But maybe 2018 was the first one.
2018. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So 6 years ago. Yeah. So this is the 7th Jane Austen July then, with one at the beginning and one at the end of those 6 years. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how did this come to be? Obviously, I'm guessing you two had met in the booktube community and a chat happened, or it just kind of came to be?
I only came to it late, so Katie should explain about the beginnings of it.
Yeah. So me and Marissa from Blatantly Bookish were chatting about Jane Austen. Marissa is the other host of Jane Austen July. She can't be here today, but we've been friends on BookTube for a very long time, and we both love Jane Austen hugely. And we were talking, I guess, 6 and a bit years ago about how much we love Jane Austen and how it'd be nice to do some kind of Jane Austen readathon. And originally, I think we said, oh, maybe we'll do a week. And then we had so many ideas of challenges and so many things we wanted to do, and then somehow we were like, actually, I think we're gonna have to have it be a month. So we decided to start Jane Austen July, and I guess that was 6 years ago then, and then we had a really good time hosting it, and it was really fun. And we decided we wanted to carry on and do it every year. And lots of people joined in on BookTube and made amazing videos. And Claudia's videos in Jane Austen July were always amazing, like absolutely fantastic Jane Austen content. So a few years ago, we asked Claudia if she wanted to come and join us and host with us, just because we loved her Jane Austen July videos especially. And we've been talking on BookTube for years as well. BookTube is a really nice community, and a lot of people make links. And I think especially there are quite a lot of us on BookTube who love classics, and we often talk to each other in the comments of each other's videos. So we kind of all get to know each other through there, and we're kind of from all over the world a bit as well. So Marissa is in the US, I'm in the UK, Claudia's in Germany, but was in the UK a while ago, probably when we started.
Yeah, so when you started in 2018, I was still living in Wales in the UK, and I'd been on BookTube for about half a year. And I think this was the first readathon that I actually participated in. I didn't realize it was the very first year of Jane Austen July. It kind of felt, even in the first year, like a really established thing. And so I just took part. I just sort of jumped in and I got really into it. And so, yeah, when I was asked to co-host, I was over the moon, as you can imagine.
So can you both tell me a little bit about how you were introduced to Austen, if it was in school or later through movie adaptations? How did she come into your life?
Let's go first.
I actually can't remember, and this kind of annoys me a bit because I've heard Katie's Jane Austen origin story and Marissa's Jane Austen origin story, and I'm not entirely sure. I feel like it might have been via Colin Firth. And that's probably not that uncommon. I definitely did not read Austen in school because I went to school in Germany. So obviously we read German literature. But I'm sure I must have read some Jane Austen before I moved to the UK. But I'm sorry, I really don't remember. I think it might have been via the Pride and Prejudice adaptation, though.
That is the bravest answer, because I think it was the BBC Colin Firth adaptation that I first watched, but I do not remember either. And it does feel like, oh, I should have this story to tell everybody, like the first time I sat down in my cozy reading corner. So thank you for being brave and telling us that. And I really think it shows to the fact that I want people to feel comfortable in the community or here on YouTube of there's no like perfect time, or you don't have to have any prerequisites to discover Austen, and there's no shame in like discovering it through a movie and then deciding you want to explore the books. There's so many ways to find her, and there's no right level of certification to be an Austen fan that you have to reach. So I really appreciate that answer.
Thank you.
I think Martin says Colin Firth has a lot to answer for. And thank you everybody that's joining us in the comments as well. If you want to let us know in the comments how you discovered Austen, that would be really fun to see how everybody came to discover her or her writings or her movie adaptations or whatever it might be. So Katie, let's hear your beautiful origin story.
So I actually think I probably saw an adaptation before I read any Austen. I think I went to see the 2005 Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice with my parents. And that would have probably been my first introduction to Austen. And I remember enjoying it, though there were certain elements of the plot where I was like, I don't really understand why this is a big deal. Because I didn't have the social context. And I love that film a lot. It's great, but it does move quite quickly. It doesn't really have as much time as you need to do the book justice. And then I guess, a year or two later, I started getting into 19th century literature, beginning with Jane Eyre. And I love Jane Eyre a lot. And I asked my mum for sort of recommendations of other classics and other 19th century books. And she had a really nice, edition of all of Jane Austen's books. And she gave me Pride and Prejudice. So I read that first and I really loved it. And then I read Sense and Sensibility, which I didn't love as much. And then I just kept reading Austen and loving them a lot. But actually, I feel like my love of Jane Austen has been quite a long and slow journey, because I did enjoy her books as a teenager, but I wouldn't have classed her as one of my favorite authors, really, though I had read all of her books. And then I studied Pride and Prejudice at A level. So when I was 17, 18, and I loved that. And studying it in all that depth was fantastic. And then when I was at university, I studied Mansfield Park. And that was a real turning point for me, because I read Mansfield Park as a teenager. And when I first read it, I didn't love it that much. I thought it was a bit slow. And then I studied it at university and I just completely fell in love with it and all of the subtlety that Jane Austen has in her books. Yeah. And after that, I just kept reading and rereading Jane Austen. And I worked for a year when I was doing my master's at the Jane Austen Centre in Bath as a costumed character, wearing a full Regency dress and a bonnet, talking to people about Jane Austen. And while I was working there, I reread all of Jane Austen a lot. I read a lot of Jane Austen biographies, and I learned a lot about her life. And that was where I think she became one of my absolute favorite authors. And I just learned a lot about her as a person, as well as learning more about her books and reading her books a lot. So that kind of, I feel like I always loved Jane Austen ever since I first read her, but the love has definitely grown a lot over time as well.
There's definitely a difference between reading for pleasure and then reading in a literary criticism sort of setting, because I remember having to read Dickens in a literary criticism class, which I would never choose to read Dickens on my own. That's not my thing, but just the reward of calling out these different, like making these connections through things, and the professor being excited as we were getting excited made the reading just a whole nother level. And so there's I know some really great videos that I've seen of people doing the kind of like literary criticism of Austen here on YouTube. And I think if you are struggling a little bit as you're reading it, watching some of those and seeing people make like certain connections and calling out certain things about the book or subtleties that you might not understand the context, as a reader set apart by a few hundred years, it really opens up the reading into a whole nother level that you can enjoy the book in a whole new way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think a lot of Austen is about understanding the historical context, because obviously they were written for a contemporary audience who'd, know exactly what it means that the Bennet sisters didn't have a governess or something like that. But today we read this and we don't, like Katie said, don't understand why it's a big deal. And so knowing the historical context definitely adds a lot of richness to the book and to the understanding of it.
Absolutely. I think it's why so many of us say, like, oh, we reread Austen and it's completely different each time you read it again. And I know for myself, like, I'm learning different things, like little subtleties along the way. And so you pick up new things each time, because you do kind of need to have that connection of a little bit of historical knowledge along the way as you're going and reading through the book. So Katie, you said Sense and Sensibility was not one of your favorites, but yet we're reading it for the read along this month. So how is it going? I know you said you had a very busy month, so you weren't sure how many prompts that you were going to get to. But have you been reading it? Do you have a new opinion of Sense and Sensibility at this point in your life?
Yeah, so Sense Sensibility has actually been one where I've gone on a bit of a journey. So for a very long time, it was my least favorite Jane Austen novel, and I just didn't get as much out of it, and I felt like the pacing was off, and I just didn't like it as much. And then a few years ago I reread it, and something clicked and I liked it a lot more. And then I read a book called The Genius of Jane Austen by Paula Byrne, which is a great non-fiction work about Jane Austen and theatre, and the way she wrote about Sense Sensibility and the things she picked out really changed how I read it. And ever since then I've absolutely loved it, and now I think it's one of my favorite Jane Austens and has sort of shot up in my estimation a really long way. And so I think I've actually reread Sense and Sensibility every year for the last sort of like 3 years now, and every year I just love it more. So that's really nice. And yeah, that's our group read, our read along this year. I think I'm more or less on track. I might be a couple of chapters behind, but I'm really enjoying rereading it as ever. I often listen to Sense and Sensibility on audiobook. There's a great audiobook narrated by Rosamund Pike, but I've actually switched halfway to the physical book because there were so many other audiobooks I wanted to get through this Jane Austen July.
I was really surprised at how much I was laughing out loud, especially through the first few chapters of reading Sense and Sensibility again. And I didn't remember it being so funny, but I don't know why this time it was like just striking me as really funny. And it goes on for pages, the whole part between like, well, you're really sure that you want to give them that amount of money, between them. And I was like, she just, like, it felt like this should get boring at a certain point, but it just kept, her turn of phrase and everything that she was using just kept making me LOL while I was enjoying it. Claudia, what are your thoughts on Sense and Sensibility? Where does it rank for you?
Well, I am currently listening to the Rosamund Pike audiobook as well. I'm definitely behind schedule, but I'll get there when I get there. And in my either in my announcement video or my TBR video for this Jane Austen July, I very confidently said Sense and Sensibility is no one's favorite Jane Austen book. And then obviously I got a lot of comments from people saying, actually, it is my favorite Jane Austen book. So I'm also definitely getting more out of it on every single reread. And I think what I love about Sense and Sensibility, what it's got more of than most other Jane Austen novels, is this really strong sense of setting, because it's set in the countryside, and it's got this contrast between London and the countryside, between like the rich life that the sisters live at the beginning of the novel, and then this sort of thrown into poverty, obviously not actual poverty, but you know, as far as Jane Austen characters go, and they have this really strong connection to this cottage that they live in and the surroundings. And to me, it's kind of the cottage core novel, and reading it through that lens, through thinking of it as, you know, a novel about the place as well, is definitely giving me more than before I thought about the book that way.
She really takes a lot of time to set up the scenery around that cottage atmosphere that she gives us. I love that calling it cottage core is just brilliant.
I think also with Jane Austen, a lot of people love her books for the love stories, and a lot of her books do have wonderful love stories in. And I think certainly when I was a teenager, the things I loved most in Jane Austen were the love stories. But actually, some of her books are much more love stories than others. And I think Sense and Sensibility, when I stopped thinking about it as a love story and started thinking about it as a sibling story, which is exploring, yes, the sister relationship between Marianne and Eleanor, but also all the kind of like future sibling-in-law relationships are quite interestingly done as well. And there's so many other pairs of siblings in the book. Once I started thinking about it as a sibling story rather than a love story, I just liked it so much more because suddenly the pacing wasn't off anymore. And actually, it's really important that you're often learning about Eleanor and Edward's relationship through the way Marianne is observing them. And you're often learning about Marianne and Willoughby's relationship through the way Eleanor is observing them. And I think the first time I read Sense and Sensibility, I felt that was odd because I wanted to be in the head of the character whose story we were in. But actually, it's really important that you're often seeing things from the sisters, from the other sisters' perspective. And actually, once I started thinking about why Jane Austen chose to do that, I just loved the book a lot more and just got a lot more out of it. And one of the things Paula Byrne talks about in her book is how Northanger Abbey is a pastiche of Gothic novels, and we all know that because today we all recognise the tropes of Gothic literature. But actually, Sense and Sensibility is in part a pastiche and a commentary on the sentimental novel. But because the sentimental novel didn't really stay around much after the 18th, early 19th century, we don't get those references in the same way. And actually, she's doing a lot of very clever things, subverting expectations from the sentimental novel that we just don't pick up on in the same way today. And thinking about that also really helped me think about Sense and Sensibility in a different light, I guess.
Yeah. You know how people often say, like, what's the one book you wish you could read again for the first time? I wish I could transport myself back and be a contemporary reader of Austen just to know what the experience was like to read this and have all the context going on, because we're obviously putting so many layers of trying to interpret the time period and understand all the context and all that's going on. But just to read it for the first time as like it just came out and read it in that setting would be amazing. All right, we've got a few comments that we better catch up on here. So let's see. James says, for me, it was the late 80s or early 90s when he discovered Austen and wanted to broaden my reading horizons. A book club. So that's amazing. Discovered through a book club. We have no perfect time to discover Austen. That's so true. I discovered it in my 30s and don't regret it. Jane Austen is amazing. Have to agree with that one. James says some years later, there's a long review in the New York Times Book Review of the marriage novel, which added context and richness to the Austen experience. I love that. Yeah, there's so many ways and so many resources to search. And if you're having difficulty understanding Austen's novels, don't give up. I think it's definitely a keep going sort of experience because it does get easier. Do you have any tips, either of you, for if somebody's new and trying to make it through their first Austen novel, what they can do to make it easier?
My tip when reading classics is always to not worry about the stuff you don't understand, because it's absolutely fine if you don't understand everything. It doesn't matter. You can still get so much out of the book without understanding everything. And I think for some people, they want an annotated edition or they want a lot of notes or they want that context. But actually, I often find that if you're a new reader starting a new author and a new classic author, actually that kind of information can all feel really daunting and overwhelming. And if you just read the book and let it wash over you, and if you don't understand everything, that's absolutely fine. Then you're often going to have a better experience and going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Audiobooks can be quite good for that because you're just listening and you're just kind of being carried along with the story, and you're not worrying as much about, oh, did I understand that sentence or have I missed a bit of context? Because actually, yes, Jane Austen's books are very much of their time, but also they are great stories with great characters and really funny moments, and you will get that even without knowing all of the social context.
Absolutely. Claudia?
Yeah, I think both Katie and I share the approach of reading classics as books and enjoying the stories in classics and not seeing them as some sort of something to study and to analyze, which of course we can do as well, but they are primarily stories for us to enjoy. And so I'm completely in agreement with her on that. I think one tip I would give if you're completely new to Jane Austen is don't, you can watch the adaptation first. You don't have to dive into the book straight away. There's so many great adaptations of Jane Austen novels. And because these adaptations, unlike the novels, are written with the 20th or 21st century audience in mind, they often explain these details that in the books are kind of between the lines, these things that the readers of the time would have understood, but we don't necessarily know. And so these adaptations make them more overt, they make them more obvious, they translate them into modern language and into modern understanding of social connections and things like that. So I think with Jane Austen, watch an adaptation first, and if you enjoy it, then go for the book and get the full experience out of that.
I love that. It really helps me. Annotated makes me like I'm looking too many places and I get taken out of the story way too quickly. So I can see how it'd be helpful to just go for the story and just take what you can from it, and then recognize that you might pick it up again and read it and see new things that you didn't discover before. And I always recommend to people, I love the suggestion of watching the movie because it really does help get the context of what you're going into. You have an idea of the story already. And then if you're missing some of those connections, you at least are familiar with the characters to then get what's happening in the rest of it as it's going on.
I think I got into a lot of 19th century literature as a teenager by watching adaptations first. And in a way, it was really helpful, not only because then I went into reading those books, not feeling daunted by them and feeling that I had a vague sense of the plot, but also thinking about what was different between the book and the adaptation and why it might be different also helped me start analysing them in a more kind of relaxed way. Like I always used to find it really interesting to see what was changed between the adaptation and the book. And that was just a really nice experience, I guess. I know some people feel that they always want to read the book first, but I think actually, especially when you're getting into a new author, watching an adaptation first is completely fine and can be quite helpful.
I think the other way around could be easier because the movies generally, because of time constraints, do have to cut out quite a bit. So it's easier. If I read the book first, I have like expectations from my imagination being translated on screen, and that typically doesn't happen. So to consume the movie and then go into the book, at least in my opinion, can sometimes like I don't have as high expectations and things are going to fail because of that. All right, let's catch up on a few. We have, I had a winning ticket at a fundraiser and nobody had chosen the Jane Austen compilation of her novels, which I couldn't get my head around, so I went home. I can't, happy camper. I love that. Austen reads modern, very relatable humor and fun. Yeah, we definitely see, I mean, even talking about Sense and Sensibility, we have, the fall from a bit of wealth pulled out from under your feet and you end up in a smaller atmosphere. I think it's very relatable in a world that can feel like things are shifting sometimes very quickly, and you go from stability to feeling in a very unstable, is that a word? A very shaky environment with not knowing exactly what's going to happen around you. Maybe moving to a smaller home, a new high school, like even to, I think, teenagers, that could feel like a very relatable connection. And Marianne is 16 in the book, I think, and we see her at. So that's definitely a connector that happens. Siblings not getting along and not seeing the other's personality, very relatable connections. And all of her novels, it's just such tried and true humanity that we see coming through in her stories. What is the second? I can't remember what is our second read along for the month going to be.
It's Jane Austen's unfinished work. So we're reading The Watsons and Sanditon.
So have you both, I'm assuming, read those before?
I've read
I
them
have not.
I have not. So what are you looking forward to, Claudia, out of reading these?
I'm more excited about Sanditon because I know more about it. I know it's a seaside novel. I'm a little bit nervous about it because there's so little of it. I looked it up in my edition, and I think it's 50 or 60 pages. So I'm expecting to really, really get into it, and then suddenly it stops. But then there's, of course, also an adaptation that I'm probably going to go into straight away, and then to see how that expands the story and finishes it. And yeah, so that's the one I'm most excited about. I know barely anything about the Watsons. I'm really terrible in that way. I don't like to be spoiled before I read a book. So
I like the Watsons more than Sanditon, actually. So I'll be interested to see what you think. It's really interesting. They are, to call them unfinished novels is almost wrong because they're really fragments. Like they're only beginnings. They're not even, probably less than 10% of what the novel would have been, or 20% maybe. But they're not very much at all. There's not much of them, but they are really interesting, and it's kind of sad to think, of the books that could have been if Jane Austen had finished them.
Right. Katie, maybe you can speak to this as an author. I was listening to a podcast, and they're talking about how we have a few partial manuscripts from authors that we wish we had the full story out of, and how that's going to change over the years to come because you're writing on your computer, you're saving files. It's not going to be as easy to have, like, do you ever print out a copy of a book that you're working on and you haven't finished at any point for someone 100 years later to discover Katie's unfinished manuscript?
Almost never. I almost never print things out, but I guess all the files are on my computer, which someone could get, I suppose. If I were to pass away, then all the files would be on my computer of lots of like unfinished books that are really bad that I probably wouldn't want anyone to read. I think after Terry Pratchett died, he instructed people to destroy his hard drive and run it over with a bulldozer or something because he really didn't his
I made a video about that, actually.
That's why I know
about I made a video about posthumous publication and the ethics of it. And it's a really difficult question because if Jane Austen had written these books and saved them on a hard drive, she probably would have just deleted the Watsons and Sanditon. She probably wouldn't have kept them around, or she would have hidden them away in some folder. And so it's interesting to think about these novels as posthumous publications. Of course, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion were also published posthumously, and we don't think of them in that way. We don't think of them as books that Jane Austen might not have wanted published, although there is enough evidence to suggest that she wanted both of these novels published. But I'm fairly certain she didn't title them, for example, that they were both titled by her brother, so she didn't come up with the names Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. And in fact, Persuasion doesn't sound like a very Jane Austen-y book title if you think about it. I mean, obviously you've got Sense and Sensibility, which are also concepts, but Persuasion sounds a bit un-Jane Austen-y. So yeah, it's interesting to think about that.
Edited her other books quite a lot before publication. There's references in her letters to her lopping and cropping as she cuts books. So it's interesting to think about. So Northanger Abbey and Persuasion are finished, but were they definitely finished as she wanted them to be? Would she have worked on them more or changed them more before publication if she had lived longer and they'd been published in her lifetime? That's really hard to know.
She had enough time to publish Northanger Abbey. That one was even sent to a publisher, if I remember correctly, and then held, and there was some legal issues and stuff.
Yes, it was accepted for publication, and then the publisher they advertised it, and then they just didn't publish it because they just decided not to, and they kept it for years until her brother bought it back, and then she reworked it a bit. We think she at least changed the name of some characters because it was originally called Susan, and there's no one called Susan in Northanger Abbey now, so presumably that used to be Susan. So she obviously renamed some characters, if nothing else, and did some other work on it. But we don't know. I guess we don't really know. I think there's one reference in her letters where she says something like Miss Catherine's going to stay on my shelf for a while, something like that. But
yes.
So, It's really interesting to think about, like, her opinion of her books, because obviously she's had such a huge fandom for so many years, but what would she have truly thought about these books being out there? This might be a question for either one of you. It says, do you know why Charlotte Bronte didn't like her work? Anyone have an answer for that?
I think Charlotte Bronte thought that that Jane Austen was passionless and that her books had like no fire to them, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but there's definitely letters from Charlotte Bronte saying that she found Jane Austen a bit like bland and lacking in passion. I don't know, they were gritty and dark enough for the Brontes, maybe.
It's incredible how much the style changed within the few decades between Austen and Bronte, isn't it? Because they read so completely different, and there's only 40 years between them, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, my library right now has a display with classics set up, and it has little cards with 1-star reviews in front of them. And so I took pictures of them because I was so amused instead of my friends. But the Bronte sisters, the works of the Bronte sisters, has a 1-star review, and it says, "People are angry and then they die." That is the 1-star review. I think I've seen the 1-star review of Austen that goes around. It's like people all sitting at a house talking or something like that.
Yeah, there was one that went viral that said it's just people going to each other's houses.
Yes.
Which it is.
Let's see, we have a few other comments here. Sanditon is wonderful, like a dream in some ways. So Claudia, there is something to look forward to. Brian says he recently joined a book club where they read bad horror novels. Nobody else in the club has read Jane Austen. I feel sorry for these people. It is still amazing to think there's so many people that are going to be discovering Austen. And next year, I think is going to be a really big year and see a resurgence of people getting excited and discovering her books in new ways. And it's just, I find it so thrilling when somebody says, I saw the adaptations for the first time, or I just read my first Austen novel. And it's really such a big family of people that just love her books, love her stories, love her characters, and want to pass it on to others.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like about liking Jane Austen's books is not only reading and enjoying her books, but also there's a massive universe of Jane Austen fans and Jane Austen retellings and books about Jane Austen and Jane Austen merch and mugs and stuff, and that's just really fun. It's really nice to be part of that kind of community online and elsewhere, people who just really love Jane Austen and who have a massive passion for Jane Austen and who all know these characters and share a love of these books. That's just a really fun thing to be part of, that makes it a really rich, rewarding experience to be a Jane Austen fan, I guess.
I'm really missing out on that after moving back to Germany, I have to say, because I tell people, oh yeah, I'm doing Jane Austen July, I'm reading Jane Austen, and they just look at me like, what? And they might have heard of Pride and Prejudice, but it's just not a cultural thing here like it is in the UK, obviously, and presumably in the US as well, just because they're English language books. So I'm really missing out on that a little bit here.
You're going to just have to be the one to make it happen.
I'm trying.
It's fascinating how you meet someone, and if you have the connection of Austen, it's you instantly feel like it's a friend, and any other difference that you might have in the world just kind of falls to the side, and you have this connection with a fellow Austen lover that you can chat for forever about things and just feel a kinship with them.
Yeah, when I worked at the Jane Austen Centre in Bath many years ago, some people came round because they were massive Jane Austen fans, and some people just came round because they were, doing a touristy thing when they were on holiday and visiting Bath. And when I worked there, we all used to do a kind of introductory talk about Jane Austen's life. And I made a joke about Mr. Collins, and you could always tell who were the Jane Austen fans by the people who laughed and who smiled, and the people who didn't even need a joke. It was just the mention of Mr. Collins's name, and they were already amused. And I was like, yes, now I know Jane Austen fan with this moment of connection. It was always lovely.
He says, I wonder if Austen would be surprised to know she has a 21st century fan club. I wonder what she would think about that. What are your thoughts?
I mean, she didn't have sort of massive success in her lifetime. Her books were out there and doing okay, but I don't think she could have known what a massive impact she would have on literature and on so many people.
Yeah,
I think she would be really happy though, because from all indications, her goal was really for people to read her books. I mean, yes, the money would have been amazing, but she really just wanted people to be enjoying these stories that she was telling. So I think for her to see so many people reading them and owning so many editions of the books even, I think she would have been pretty excited to see her fandom.
Yeah.
All right, I wanted to ask both of you, I have a little stack sitting here to the side. Are you reading anything for your Jane Austen sort of fan fiction pick for the month? And what is it, if you are going to get to that prompt?
Yeah, I've already read one. Well, actually, no, it's not. I'm not reading any modern retellings. I'm reading Regency romance novels, but yeah, actually, none of them are direct adaptations at all of Jane Austen. But I have read A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall, which is a modern romance novel set in the Regency. And I'm currently reading Venetia by Georgette Hare, which I feel like is the the basis of Regency romance. But yeah, none of them are really directly taken from Jane Austen's works.
How about you, Katie?
So I've just finished today listening on audiobook to The Late Mrs. Willoughby by Claudia Gray, which is a Jane Austen themed murder mystery. So it's the second book in the series. The first one is The Murder of Mr. Wickham. And in the first book, lots of Jane Austen characters from all of her books and some children of some Jane Austen characters from other books all come together at a house party, and then Mr. Wickham gets killed and they have to work out who did it. And of course it's Mr. Wickham, so everyone wanted him dead for various reasons. And this is the second book in the series, kind of following on with a new Jane Austen related murder. And that's really, really good fun, and I really enjoy that series. So that's been my my proper retelling. And then I also, on the line of Regency historical fiction, I just finished reading A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin, which is set in the Regency period. Came out last year, about a 27-year-old very recently widowed woman who runs into the man that she nearly married 10 years before. So it's got a little bit of a persuasion hint, or it's playing with persuasion in some fun ways. But it's really, really good. It was just so delightful and so well done and so funny. So I really recommend that as well.
Have you read the Lady Catherine? I cannot remember the title in the Claudia Gray series.
No,
it's the newest one. Okay, so you got to get through a few. Those are really fun books, I think, if someone is looking for, if they love a good cozy mystery and they want to see the characters kind of reinvented in a new way.
What have you been reading?
Brian asks, has Katie made her Victober TBR yet?
That would be several months ahead of time. No. Many months ahead of my Victober TBR.
Short answer, no. Hilder says, I am currently reading The Murder of Mr. Wickham. Great book. You are going to love that one. Kevin asks, how many of Jane Austen's letters survived? Are they all from a particular time period? I feel like it's in the low hundreds. Yeah,
definitely a lot of them didn't. We know her sister Cassandra burnt a lot of them. I don't think they're all from a particular time period, the ones that survived. I think there is a spread. I've read collections of her letters and it definitely spans a long period of time, but we definitely there's an awful lot that we're missing. So we just have some of her letters, basically.
I feel like the letters that we have got tend to be the ones sent to extended family members or acquaintances. I feel like they're really important. The sort of the ones we want, the really personal, intimate letters. I feel like they're all gone.
Yeah, there were quite a few to Cassandra, but she must have written hundreds, maybe thousands of letters. Every time they were separated, they wrote to each other every couple of days. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that we don't know about Jane Austen and her life, I guess.
Could you imagine if your everyday text log was written out in letter form? There would just be so much correspondence. And so I feel that was letter writing for them. There had to have been so many letters going back and forth frequently. But yeah, I think they were definitely she was choosing based on maybe the topics and what content was in some of them, what were going to survive. And also, if anyone is interested in the letters, we do have, for our Friends of the Foundation tier in our Patreon community, we have some award-winning audiobook narrators that narrate a Jane Austen letter that you receive each month, which is a really fun project, and it really makes it come alive in a completely new way to hear them read out loud to you. So if you're interested in that, it is in our Patreon. We have, let's see, Did I miss any before? I don't want to miss anybody's comments. Brian says, no matter what century a novel was written in, you can relate to and understand the characters. I do think a lot of the classics, that's one thing that obviously kind of makes them a classic, is there are universal threads that make them relatable, and that's why people keep reading them. Let me see here. If you guys can see, I think you can see the comments on your side, right? Feel free to read any if I'm missing anything.
Someone asked are Joan Aiken's books about Jane Austen characters still read? So I read her book Jane Fairfax a couple of years ago, which I really enjoyed, which is obviously about Jane Fairfax from Emma, kind of telling things from her perspective. I really liked that one. I think she's written some others that I haven't read, but I did find that one really enjoyable.
I like Brian's comments. Is it corny to think Elizabeth Bennet is Austen's best character? No, it's not corny. It's perfectly fine. Prime Prejudice is my favorite Jane Austen book. You know, we can admit to being mainstream, to being basic, but it's an amazing book. She's an amazing character.
The reason
Brian
why
still has
is most people's favorite Jane Austen is because it's just really fantastic.
Exactly.
Really good, isn't it?
Brian says he still has a crush on Keira Knightley. I think I can speak for us all. Yes. Yeah, I don't know why we are supposed to be ashamed of liking the mainstream, the most popular one, because it is such an excellent book and the adaptations are brilliant and fun, and Keira Knightley. So
let's see, we have certainly Elizabeth is the character I best remember. Yeah, she is very memorable because she's funny, she's witty, she's all the things, and it makes her easy to connect with her characters, whether in the books or in the movies. She's just definitely a standout, for sure. All right, so if you both want to kind of give us any tips, if people are kind of midway through almost Jane Austen July, maybe they're losing a little bit of steam at this point, anything to help get them through, permission to not do all the prompts, like what advice do you give us at this point?
Oh, you never have to do all the prompts. We usually say for Jane Austen July, the only prompt you have to do is to read something by Jane Austen. That's the only thing that you actually have to do. All the rest is just bonus extra fun. And I do think one thing I always find really nice about Jane Austen July is that because is that I rarely run out of steam in Jane Austen July because I'm reading some Jane Austen, but I'm also reading some new retellings of Jane Austen and some nonfiction about Jane Austen. And I'm reading like a lot of different things from different time periods and lots of different forms. I often try and read like a play from Jane Austen's time period, and that's a really different format. And I usually listen to some audiobooks and read some books physically. So usually there can be quite a nice mix. And if you're struggling with one thing, then just read something a bit different. Within the prompts of Jane Austen July, I think there's scope to read like a bunch of different stuff. And that's really nice if you're running out of steam on one thing, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually done all the challenges in a month. And it's not even, so there's 7 challenges, 5 of them are reading challenges. So even if you do all of them, it's 5 books in a month, which is more than I normally read in a month, but not that much more. And still, I have so far failed every single year because sometimes I don't fancy reading a nonfiction book. Or I don't fancy reading a retelling or something like that. And that's fine. I still get a lot out of the experience. So, just relax and enjoy whatever you're currently reading. And if you're not, then move on to the next book.
Absolutely. One thing I've been really surprised in this year, so I entered my contemporary romance era because one of my friends on Instagram kept sharing. She's a huge Jane Austen fan. She is a professor. She teaches Austen, like everything is Austen. Well, she was talking about these different contemporary romance. I was like, I finally need to check these out. I am so surprised at how many contemporary romance books make an allusion to Austen or Mr. Darcy or talk about a character reading one of her books. Like, it is so mainstream, I think, that I even see it like seeping into other genres, and I found that really interesting. So I do think there's some great ways to kind of like take the prompts and then turn them into what works for you if you're struggling with the reading, and you can still get a bit of Austen in so many different ways.
Yeah, there's so much Austen in so much popular culture and so many different books, and I really enjoy that too.
It's because she plays with these character archetypes. They're not completely foreign to us. The Elizabeth Bennet, Mr. Darcy, it's very, I don't know, it's a bit Shakespearean. It's a bit like in, who am I thinking of? Much Ado About Nothing, that sort of they hate each other, but really they love each other. Like it's very familiar to us because modern rom-coms are based on these tropes, and Jane Austen uses them as well, and so they are familiar to us. And I think that's why we find it so easy to enjoy them, as opposed to some of her contemporaries. Someone in the comments just said, Jennifer says, I'm struggling with Belinda, but I really want to finish it. And I feel like that's an experience that a lot of people have with Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth, because it's not as easy to absorb as Jane Austen. It's much longer. The plot isn't as tight. I mean, I think you get a lot out of it if you do persist, but it's not as gripping as Jane Austen, and the characters aren't as immediately accessible.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating novel, Belinda. It's really, really interesting, and it looks at a lot of fascinating themes, but it's less immediately it's less immediately relatable and immersive than Jane Austen, I would say. And I do find that in general when I read other books from Jane Austen's time, I'd never come across anyone that immerses me as much as Jane Austen, compels me as much as her books.
Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is always my other pick for a Regency novel that is as gripping as Jane Austen. Obviously completely different vibes.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, you know, there's a reason why we cling to Jane Austen in a way that we definitely don't to some of her contemporaries.
Isn't it fascinating too? There's like such a wide span of time that it's not like we have a grouping of female authors from that time period. They're like, oh, this whole group of, like, it's Austen. Like, no one even comes close to how much her books have been like the front runner for her time and continuously just enthralling people. So Ryan says Mr. Collins might be the best supporting character in literary history.
We both love him, don't we, Katie?
I feel like he definitely plays on that perfect balance of, like, you know, in Shakespeare when things get heavy and then you need that dose of humor. Like, Mr. Collins is that person that, you know,
and yet he is entirely essential to the plot, because obviously without him, you know, he is the personification of the pressure that's put on these sisters. So he's just brilliantly woven into the plot while still being the comic relief character.
Every year on YouTube, in Jane Austen July, I like to do a deep dive into one character. And my Let's Talk About Mr. Collins video is one of my most viewed videos on YouTube. It's like 45 minutes of me talking about Mr. Collins, and that's one of my most viewed videos on YouTube. And that makes me very happy because he's a fascinating character. And there's so many of the side characters in Jane Austen's books are like that. They're really complex. They're sometimes ridiculous, but they're absolutely fascinating. And that's one of the things I love about rereading her books. Is so often I'll be rereading and I'll just be like, oh, I've just got a whole new different like take on this character than I did before. Like reading Sense Sensibility a lot over the last few years, Mrs. Jennings has really come to the fore for me as like a really fantastic, interesting character who I just don't think I really took much interest in the first time I read the book. And now I think she's fascinating. So there's so many characters like that in Jane Austen that suddenly you'll just be like, oh, I didn't think about you properly before, but you're also really interesting. Every character who just appears for a couple of scenes in Jane Austen, they're still really well developed and they're still really complicated and interesting.
I think these matron characters often get overlooked. Also, obviously, Mrs. Bennet, these older generation women who are trying to move the story in a particular way. And at first glance, they read like villains, like Mrs. Bennet, for example. But then if you really understand where they're coming from, they actually make some very good points. And maybe more people should listen to them in the books. And yeah, I just love how much she thought about every single character in her books.
And it's funny how oftentimes I think as readers we'll read a book and then it's hard to remember the characters because you move on to the next book and then you kind of have to take a refresher. But like we literally know every secondary character in these books, and we know their character qualities and what we love about each one of them. And it's not just the main two people in the book, that's the romance part that we fall in love with. It's everybody else in the book and the parts that they play into the story and how they connect and how they make things happen.
Yeah, and rereading Jane Austen is such a joy because of that, I think, as well.
Right, so he's terrified of his friends offending Lady Catherine, still relatable in 2024.
Yes.
Let's see. Mary Shelley was such a deep thinker, but maybe Jane Austen was more of an observer of life. I don't know. I definitely think she did enjoy observing people and getting to mingle with new people. It's something that I've been learning a bit more about her life. And what was going on around her and how she was experiencing it from different places, which I think adds a fascinating element to studying her. I have the book on my shelf. Zoe Wedden has Jane Austen's best friend, The Life of Martha Lloyd. I think I got that title correct. It's a fascinating book if you want to kind of see another facet of Austen's life through a different lens of kind of the women and how they were connecting and living and surviving through their own experiences together. I would really recommend that one. Jennifer says, you always learn something new when rereading Austen's books. It's why we all love Jane Austen July. Yes, that is so true. We have a few Frankenstein comments. Dracula, the comments are going off the rails here as we get into all the classics.
I would definitely be on the Frankenstein side of Frankenstein versus Dracula. I much prefer Frankenstein.
I haven't read Dracula, but these are books that were written nearly 100 years apart. I think you can't really compare them.
They're very, very different.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned, Claudia, how, between the Brontes and Austen, like, things change so much in writing styles and what was happening in the world during these time periods so much. So you have to compare books that are a wide breadth apart is maybe not as fair to the books. Lady Susan is also epistolary. Have you seen the adaptation Love and Friendship?
Yeah, I love that.
That is like the hidden gem of shows.
It's brilliant. I watched it on Katie's recommendation, Katie and Marissa's recommendation. They both recommended it, and yeah, loved it.
That's my
I love Lady Susan too.
That is my watch when I'm working and I need a little bit of humor in my life. The tiny green balls for the peas just gets me every time when he's like, what are these? He is the Mr. Collins of that story.
And I very much enjoy him too.
I love that adaptation because it's almost a bit more arty. It's a bit more sort of indie film than most of the other Austen adaptations. And I think it takes more liberties in that regard, in that it is a bit harder to follow maybe, and it isn't quite as serving you Jane Austen on a nice modern plate, but you kind of have to understand it. But the characters inhabit their world so well. I think it's amazing.
It's so funny and it's so stylized, and
yes.
So fun.
The drama at the beginning, even how they introduce the characters with their names on the screen, it's like this dun-dun music about it, and it's just so much fun. All right, any other recommendations for books that we should be checking out that you think we need to be considering to add to our Jane Austen July list that you guys have read and enjoyed in your past Jane Austen Julys?
Every time someone asks for recommendations, I cannot remember a single book I've ever read in my life. I'll think about it while Katie answers.
Many recommendations I could give. So Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. That's a really great Jane Austen biography I always recommend. I also really recommend John Mullen's book, What Matters in Jane Austen, 20 Crucial Puzzles Solved. You shouldn't read it unless you've read all of Jane Austen's books, including Lady Susan, because it will spoil all of them. But it's a really fantastic book where he goes through like 20 sort of seemingly minor things that you find in lots of Jane Austen books and kind of examines them. So it's things like, what does age matter in Jane Austen? How old are all the characters and what do we know about their ages? Which characters never speak any dialogue? Sort of which books look at the seaside and why. And he just does a great job of like spotting patterns across the whole of Jane Austen's work and kind of examining her whole body of work rather than taking one book at a time, which I just really, really like. So that's probably one of my really big recommendations for Jane Austen July for nonfiction work. That one is just fantastic. Thank you.
And I know you both have videos too that everyone can check out if they haven't, with recommendations as well.
Yeah, we do an announcement video every year for Jane Austen July, and we always recommend books in those videos. So there's a lot of material to go through. For nonfiction works, I would probably recommend The Time Traveler's Guide to Regency Britain by... Cannot remember the author's name.
Is it Ian Mortimer?
That's it, Ian Mortimer. I think, yes. That sounds about right. It's not a perfect book. I have a lot of criticisms of it, and it's not entirely accurate as well from some some of the history he talks about, but it is a really great overview of the Regency period in England specifically. I think he might talk about the rest of the UK as well, but it really gives you a very broad and still very entertaining overview of the society that Jane Austen's books are set in, including the parts that are not at the forefront of Jane Austen's books, such as the working classes, the Industrial Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, which obviously all influence the environment of the books, but that aren't addressed directly. But understanding that broader historical background just makes you really get the books more.
I've heard that one's fantastic as an audiobook. I have the book on my shelf, but
Okay.
I'm curious to check it out as an audiobook.
It's also a book that you don't have to necessarily read cover to cover, where you can just read a chapter on something that interests you. It's not, it's very easy to dive in and out of that.
And the book that Katie mentioned, the 20 critical, I cannot remember the title. I have it over here as well, but that's a great,
yeah.
Yes, that's a great one too, that you can kind of pick up, read a chapter or so at a time and just kind of take one part and let it breathe and ruminate it on it for a bit and then go back to it at another time. I think that's a great way to do the Jane Austen July challenge, especially if it's like a busy month, because it's summer for a lot of people, is pick those books that you don't have to feel like you need to read every single thing in the book. You can just learn a little bit as you go, and enjoy that information as you're reading your other books for the challenge and watching the movies and having fun. Well, I think we are almost at an hour, so we should probably wrap up. But thank you to everyone that joined us in the comments. It was a lot of fun to see everyone chatting with us. It was delightful to get to talk to both of you. Thank you so much for creating Jane Austen July and making it what it has become. And it just seems like every year it's going to keep growing. My son asked me, why is there not a Jane Austen June and a Jane Austen January? I said, maybe that will happen some year. We'll see. Katie, do you want to, and then Claudia, leave us again with where we can find you, and any updating announcements or anything that you want to let us know for your challenge, or also your book again, Katie?
Yeah, so I'm at Books and Things on YouTube, and Katie J. Lumsden on Instagram and X and everywhere else. And yeah, my new novel, The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hearst, is coming out on Thursday in the UK, and it is set in the very early Victorian period, but it's got lots of Austen vibes.
Obviously, Marissa's channel, so she's the other co-host, is Blatantly Bookish. You should definitely check her out as well. And my channel is Spinster's Library. I don't have any books coming out, but if all goes well, there'll be a video soon on the channel.
We can definitely follow you and support you and go and like your videos and comment and spread the love of everything that you're doing over there, because it is a lot of work goes into your videos for both of you, I know.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Of course. And you can click the subscribe button if you haven't yet for us here at the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation. If you are not aware, go and check out what we are doing as a foundation. We are here to help children in all parts of the world that don't have access to literacy programs and help fund so that they can have reading materials and to just be able to completely change their lives. Because I know for myself and so many other people, like if you have access to books and reading and the ability to read, especially as a child, it can truly change your life and can really help you grow, and education is so important. So check out the work that we are doing over at the Literacy Foundation. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It was a lot of fun. Enjoy the rest of your Jane Austen July, and we'll see you in our next videos. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.